By late 1996, the Sony PlayStation had the momentum of a runaway freight train, with the strong foundation of games being one of the building blocks for this success. Now, just a little over a year after its release, we get a sequel to a popular and successful early PlayStation title. What could possibly go wrong? Today, we take a look back at Reloaded. Reloaded was developed by Gremlin Interactive and published by Interplay in late 1996, a sequel to Loaded, which was released to commercial and critical success just a year earlier. Reloaded is a top-down run-and-gun shooter which leans heavily into being edgy and violent. Much like its predecessor, the game markets itself as being an ultra-violent bloodbath full of deranged characters and enemies, with magazine advertisements of the time fully exemplifying these features. In stark contrast to Loaded, Reloaded has pivoted from the dark, grimy atmosphere of the first game and features a much more vibrant and open world. However, it largely retains the presentation of the original and also features a nice soundtrack of upbeat electronic music, which stands toe-to-toe with its predecessor. The game features 7 playable characters which offer different attributes and weapons. Among these are 2 new characters and 5 which return from Loaded. Oddly, Flank, who is front and center of the game's cover art and the cover character from the first game, is only unlocked through the use of a cheat code. Upon selecting your character, you are presented with a short cutscene which attempts to further flesh out your character. These range in quality, and honestly, most are pretty weird and stupid, but I found them to be amusing and a fun sort of time capsule of the era. Much like Loaded, I found the character differences largely negligible aside from their weapons, but there are plenty of characters to choose from to see which style fits you best. Each character also has different special attacks which act as room clears. These are limited use and are essentially the same between characters with different graphical effects. So with the basic overview out of the way, let's jump into the gameplay and see what it has to offer. Immediately you are struck with a more colorful and open world. Gone are the dank, dark atmosphere that encompassed much of the first game, but at the expense of removing the nice lighting effects that were a standout in Loaded. The game presents a completely different atmosphere right from the get-go. You're also immediately introduced to some rather plain and drab-looking enemies, which unfortunately is a sign of things to come. Control-wise, the game hasn't changed much. It's still very important to get the hang of strafing. Hold L1 to lock in your shooting direction, slowly move along and splatter enemies. With no dual joystick control option, it's key to line up your enemies and keep a safe distance, because the damage they inflict on you has been vastly ramped up. Enemies that charge and dish out melee damage are to be avoided at all costs. Thankfully, you can always outrun them. Holding square allows your character to run. This lets you retain distance to line up your next attack. Another noticeable change is your character now moves slower when firing. This is a curious change, which makes the game feel more sluggish and plodding. This is coupled with the fact that the game features fewer enemies. Rarely are you swarmed or surrounded. It's a much more stationary, less frantic or action-packed experience. A nice change in terms of enemy variety is now you are presented with a number of foes that fire projectile attacks. This was almost completely absent from Loaded, aside from turrets or the boss characters. Reloaded features 12 different levels which showcase a variety of environments. One criticism of the first game was that every level felt and looked the same. This is not the case here. Most levels take place outdoors and range from the starting desert levels to a foundry into an art gallery, just to name a few. To help explore these levels, pressing circle brings up the map, but at the expense of seeing your health, ammo, and special attack counter. It's a shame they couldn't have made both visible at all times, as you spend most of your time wandering around looking at the map. A new feature is it now highlights where you've previously been. I'm not sure if this is helpful, but it's there. Levels also offer different objectives to complete, some simply requiring keycards to advance, but others add simple puzzle-type elements, like moving boulders to activate a ramp to the next section, a pseudo-escort mission, and another which has you activating valves to cool off sections so you can safely pass. The problem is that most of these levels simply aren't fun. The new objectives have seemingly been added in place of the swarms of enemies in action from Loaded, not in addition to. Most of the levels are a slog of exploring for an item or finding the exit, with less action in between. The rooftop level is an egregious example of this problem. The island level with random portals and twigs blocking your path is another I found utterly unenjoyable and tedious. They're not all bad, but interestingly, my favorite level happens to be the one that's the most similar to the first game. Hey, it's even got a PlayStation. As for the game's story, in between levels you are presented with a mission briefing which describes the current level's objectives and moves along the plot. We're back on the trail of FUB. After his brain pod escaped at the conclusion of the first game, he has landed on the desert world of Kibut 5, implanted his brain into the body of a hermit artist and now goes by Cheb. Charming, handsome, erudite bastard. There's more to it, but it's not very noteworthy. Basically, our task is to eliminate Cheb. The game features a few items to help you on your journey. A health power-up which gives you full health, a weapon upgrade which increases your weapon's damage. You retain this upgrade until you die, so you never want to pass one up. Sadly, there is still no meter to display how powered up you are. And finally, ammo and special attack items. A new addition to the game are a handful of bosses that you encounter at the end of some levels. This sounds like a good thing, however they are mostly stationary and simply require you to blast them down as you avoid their attacks. This is another case of the developers trying to rectify criticisms of the first game, but failing to execute in the gameplay department. The worst example are the Egyptian-themed creatures you need to destroy while sliding on an ice platform that you have no control over. You do this repeatedly until you do enough damage or get lucky enough to get stuck on the edge of the platform. The Golden Mummy-esque boss from the Foundry level is the only boss I found noteworthy and somewhat enjoyed. As he takes damage, he shrinks as molten material is dropped below him and increases his attack speed. So after trudging through the game, you finally set up the final encounter with Cheb. Well, kind of. He has grown to epic proportions and somehow taken on the form of a demon, albeit one that is completely immobilized. You must gather these bombs located conveniently around the room, being careful to avoid floating knives. Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on here. It's pretty ridiculous. You explore his body, searching for parts that can be destroyed and place bombs inside. Once completed, you head to your ship and are treated to the in-game cutscene. As the bombs explode across his mutated body, you fly away, having finally defeated Cheb once and for all. Finally putting an end to FUB and the game. Overall, I found Reloaded to be a poorly executed attempt to fix the shortcomings of the first game. While they added more varied objectives and more open levels, Gone is the satisfying fast-paced action and atmosphere of its predecessor. The game is slow and plodding and simply not very fun, with the only standout feature being its nice soundtrack. In its time, Reloaded was released to mostly negative reviews. EGM gave the game scores ranging from 3 to 5.5. Jeff Gerstmann of GameSpot gave the game a 3.7. And Next Generation gave the game 2 out of 5 stars, stating, "Blood, gore, and mindless shooting were the key ingredients to Loaded, but Reloaded doesn't capture any of it as well as the first." Reloaded was also released for the PC, with an MS-DOS version coinciding with the PlayStation release, with digital versions still available on online platforms such as Steam. A Sega Saturn port was planned but eventually cancelled. So that's a look back at Reloaded. A disappointing game that had noble ambitions but failed to hit its mark. Thanks for watching everyone, and I'll see you next time.